Hi everybody, it's 314 Reactor here. Today we're looking at a game called Escape from Naraka. It's got RTX, Global Illumination, Shadowing and Reflections. It's also got DLSS in it. Now what interested me initially is that I read it has DLSS Ultra Quality in it, so I got it straight away to check that out. But for some reason Ultra Quality doesn't appear to be in the settings. I think there may have been a bug with it. So we're just going to look at it today in terms of the performance of RT on, RT off, and see how it affects the game world. So we'll start off with ray tracing off. It's using Unreal Engine 4, I believe, and running in DirectX 12. There is a DirectX 11 mode for Legacy, but we're in DirectX 12 mode. Here we are in one of the opening levels. 4K, epic settings, RTX 3090 with a Core i7-6700K and 32 gigs of RAM. And we're running at about 72 frames a second here. You can tell on the floor there's screen space reflections. Frame rate seems to be hit in certain areas when you turn around and stuff gets loaded. I've seen some texture streamer as well, so it's a bit strange. Let's turn off VSync as well, just to really make sure we're getting all the full FPS we can get. So yeah, that's full settings, 4K with no ray tracing on, around about 70 to 80 frames a second. So let's turn on the ray tracing. So that's the ray tracing on, and we're down to 45 frames a second, so that's about 45 to 50% of the frame rate taken off with that, which is about expected. You can see there the frame rate's really been impacted, down to 30 frames, 28 frames there. But we have got really nice reflections in the ground now. The lighting's a lot better, lighting propagation's a lot better, and the shadowing should be a lot better as well. I think some of the assets look a bit sort of lower resolution and not quite up to par with some other games that have RT on. It doesn't look quite as good as other RT games, but it still does look very nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on DLSS and put it into Ultra Performance mode. And that's taken us up to 129 frames a second. And it looks a bit fuzzy around the edges, but still pretty serviceable. What I have noticed around that crystal is there's some trails coming from the particles on it, which I don't think are there without the DLSS. Let's turn the DLSS off and check that. Yeah, so as you can see, there's particles from the crystal are not having trails, which means this is probably ironically an older DLSS DLL file, even though it's supposed to support ultra quality. I may try and put the new DLL file into it, because the older DLL file has those trails on particles, and the newer ones actually fix it. So I think this is using 215 or something, whereas the latest is 2211. Yeah, we've pretty much gone up about 100 frames a second though, from raw 4K to ultra performance, which is really good. So let's turn it onto performance mode now. And performance DLSS mode is taken up to about 89 frames a second. So that's a good gain, a very good gain there. And it looks really, really nice. A lot sharper than ultra performance. Obviously not quite as sharp as native 4K. So let's crank it onto balance now. See what difference that makes. So balanced is around 70 frames a second, and it's a little bit sharper. Looks quite nice actually, and that's a good frame rate. Still nice and smooth. Looks like possibly some frame drops there. Now let's crank it up to quality. Now quality is hovering around the late sort of 50s FPS mark, and it looks really, really good. About what I'd expect from DLSS quality. Just even getting close to the screen, it looks really, really nice. Let's compare the image quality to 4K, which is running about 30. Here we are back to raw 4K, and I'm assuming this will be using some sort of temporal anti-aliasing. And yeah, about 30 frames a second, late 20s. Definitely looks inferior to with DLSS on. I really wish ultra quality mode was working, so I could see what that looks like. So again, it's the case of double the performance, and the image looks better. Again, you're starting to approach super sampling levels of quality. I wish there was FSR mode in this as well, so we could compare AMD's upscaling, but unfortunately not. Yeah, those distant areas just have that sort of classic edge blur that TAA has in all Unreal 4 games. Let's go back up to quality, DLSS. There we are, everything's nice and smooth again. Those flames especially look better. They look so much less blurry. Again, I think because of the way TAA works, it's going to make those flames really weird and blurry due to the temporal artifacting that it has. What I'm going to do now is drag in the latest 2.211 DLL from Tech Power Up. I'll put a link to that in the description. And we'll see if we can get ultra quality mode unlocked. And we'll also see what the performance difference is and if there's any quality improvements. So, interestingly enough, I had to really dig around the files. So if you want to upgrade this, it's called LAYAC for some reason under the Steam folder. You go into Engine, Plugins, Runtime, Video, DLSS, Binaries, Third Party, Win64, And there's the DLSS file. I've renamed the initial one there to .old, and I've downloaded the latest 2.211 from Tech Power up here, and just dragged that over. Really weird that the name in the Steam folder is called Layak, not Escape from Naraka, and the plugin is hidden that deeply in the folders, but that should help anyone out who wants to replace it manually. So now we've upgraded that to the latest DLL. Let's go back into the game and see what the difference in quality is. So unfortunately, still no ultra quality setting under here, so we'll leave that for now. I think they may have patched it out because there was some bug with it or something. But let's go back to the game. So here we are back in this area again, and now you can see there's still some slight temporal artifacting on those particles as they're going up the screen, but a lot less pronounced than it was before. The overall image seems a lot better though, just sharper, textures look sharper, the whole screen just looks, again, super soft. Looks like it might be some shadow stifling or some weird issue near the torches there, closest to the screen. Don't know if that's part of DLSS or the game engine. So let's go back to raw 4K, no DLSS. I think that shadow issue is still kind of there, not as pronounced. So I think it's probably an engine issue with the shadows and also DLSS. And yeah, the frame rate, again, 30. And there are actually trails from those particles, just slightly, without DLSS. I think that's probably an intentional look. DLSS just probably exaggerates it a little bit. But yeah, generally TAA has never been something I've been a fan of, so I'm glad that DLSS is here to replace it, especially in Unreal games. So let's go to Ultra Performance again. And it's the same story, 130 frames again. And still that blurring on the objects there. But I think it's just a lot less pronounced, as I say. Or the bug got brought back in 2.2.11. Still looks pretty good though. I mean, that looks good enough for the frame rate. There's some really weird artifacting around the distant flames. Although it does almost look like heat haze around them. But I don't think that's intentional. Oh, and of course the reflections in the ground will probably be less detailed because Ultra Performance is running at like 720 internally, which means the ray count will be also running at that as well, so the reflections will not look as good. And here we are at Performance, and again the reflections look better because we're probably up to just under Quad HD, I think, internally, so the ray count's a lot higher. Again, 90 frames a second. So let's crank it up to balanced now. Again, same story as before, around 70 frames a second. And then let's do a comparison from 4K to quality again. So let's go to just natural 4K. Again, a bit of blurriness around the edge of things there, and there's going to be some temporal issues with the TAA. And then over to quality DLSS. And there we go. The edges of that crystal look a lot smoother. The edges of those gargoyles look really nice. Flames look really good. And yeah, that frame rate is just really good. So with Doom Eternal, I realized that you could turn on performance DLSS with ray tracing and get the same performance as 4K without the ray tracing. So let's see if that happens here as well. So that's the ray tracing off. And we're getting about 79 frames a second there. Now if we go over to ray tracing on and performance mode, we're getting 84 frames a second. It looks better because of the lighting. The DLSS looks a little bit better even at performance than native 4K. And yeah, you're getting extra 10 frames a second. So yeah, you can have ray tracing on in this game and better performance by turning on performance DLSS. So we've done the tests on the performance there, and again, having DLSS on is just amazing for performance. You can run it at very high resolution, get your ray tracing. Pretty much whatever version of DLSS you're using, you'll be able to get a really good frame rate. So let's just do some comparisons between ray tracing on and ray tracing off. So let's look down this corridor here. This is with the ray tracing on. And let's switch the ray tracing off. So it's a much sort of duller image, less realistic lighting. And even just stood here, that reflection looks pretty awful. It looks stretched, doesn't look right, and again, disappears off the screen. So it's just showing the... Whoa! Oh my god! So yeah, anyway, that was just showing the inaccuracies of screen space reflections there. So let's take this area here. Let's turn the ray tracer back on. And there we go, those reflections are now perfect. They've got a slight bit of blur to them, as ray tracing does at the moment, but the lighting looks better, and the shadowing looks better as well. So I've actually gone back to the start of the stage here. Especially to this area here, which has quite a lot of lighting in it, quite a few things in it. This is with the ray tracing on. You can see the nice shadows there, nice lighting propagation. Looks quite natural. Let's turn the ray tracer off. And you've still got some nice shadowing there. But you can see, especially on the floor there, there's some screen space ambient occlusion that isn't quite as accurate. And the shadowing doesn't look quite as good. You can just see the artifacting of screen space ambient occlusion there. If we turn the ray tracing back on, you'll see that all cleaned up and it'll look a lot more natural. Yeah, so you can see the sort of artificial corners being painted with screen space gone where they wouldn't be because of the lighting. So yeah, ray tracing really does show up these old school sort of screen space effects. So we've already seen this area ahead with RT on and off. Let's just get this corner here to see the light sort of propagating around it. Let's turn the RT off. So you can see the lighting propagation around that corner, much more artificial looking in rasterization. And the shadows behind those little bits on the wall, again, looking quite inaccurate. Just has a huge impact on the realism of lighting, ray tracing, really, obviously. But it looks more softer, more realistic, and the shadows look much more smoothly blended without sort of screen space clashing with it in ways. As you can see, they're just much more natural, much more naturally blended. Here's two really nice blue torches flaming away here. So the ray tracer on, nice soft lighting, really nice shadows there, really nice details and all the bricks. Let's turn that ray tracer off again, and it still looks pretty good. The shadows, interestingly, look a lot softer. In fact, you can barely tell there is a shadow from those torches. So I think overall, I think this light source here was causing much sharper shadows with ray tracing on there. So yeah, there we go. Look at the difference there. The columns there have got shadows to them. The actual torches themselves have really nice shadows that go around the column there. And there's even a bit of double shadowing from the different light sources there, I think, which looks really beautiful. So at this little temple bit here, again, the ray tracer on. Same story, really nice lighting, really natural ambient occlusion, global illumination, shadowing. And I think possibly some reflections on the floor there, or in these little chests. And again, let's turn that ray tracer off. Big impact to the image quality there. Just there's, especially behind those statues on the right and left, and just around that main statue there, and in the background, the light propagation is just not getting there with that sort of estimated global illumination that Rasters uses. And then ray tracer back on. So it's really exciting to see games using fully ray traced systems, you know, global illumination, reflections, everything, rather than just one or two of those things. When you have all of these things working in conjunction, the image just looks really beautiful. Now what we have here, it looks like some refraction through this crystal, and I'm wondering if that refraction is present without the ray tracer on. So let's go ahead and turn the ray tracer off again, and yes it is. So that's a rasterization effect. Possibly not quite as good. Yeah, look at those corners though. The corners are where the ambient occlusion really shows itself up. Screen space ambient occlusion really shows itself up. Because when you turn the ray tracer back on, it just looks a lot more natural. Same with the shadows behind the statues. And so for the last area we'll look at, we've got this Lavari Zone down here. Plenty of light coming out, so that's probably an emissive light source. Really bouncing all that lovely red hot flame up there. Very, very nice. Let's turn the ray tracing off again. Yeah, huge drop in the quality of even the lava itself doesn't look as good. But certainly the light bouncing up looks nowhere near as good. And then the ray tracer back on. And pretty much this entire time the frame rate has pretty much been around 60. There's been a few drops, nothing too major. Hopefully they update it again to run ultra quality DLSS so I can do a comparison between quality DLSS, ultra quality DLSS and native 4K. Really excited to see that. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Please do like and subscribe. Leave a comment, let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next video.